Hey everyone, welcome to the Auckland session of the Creating Opportunity Through Diversity in the New Zealand Space Industry webinar. My name is Yen Kai. I conduct space biology research at the University of Auckland. I'm the national point of contact for New Zealand at SJC, or Space Generation Advisory Council, where I'm also a committee member of the Space Medicine and Life Science Project Group. I'm a volunteer scientist at NASA Gene Lab, where I help Gene Lab scientists make use of statistical machine learning for their research. Tonight, I'll be moderating the session. Pleasure to have you all here today. So the New Zealand space sector is still in its early phase. So we have a great opportunity to do it differently from traditional spacefaring countries. The space sector in New Zealand is commercially led. So while it is much easier for the public sector to execute gender ethnic quotas, create jobs in rural regions, companies are not obliged to do this. So the New Zealand Space Agency has already said that New Zealand is never going to have the budget of a large spacefaring countries. And because of this, when the space sector is driven by companies, there is a risk where people of disadvantaged background could fall behind. With inequality being a reoccurring issue, we should certainly make sure that this does not bite us back later in the form of public unrest. And so there's an opportunity to make sure that the New Zealand space sector becomes a model for other countries. And so for clarification, diversity includes gender and ethnicity, disciplines and skills, culture and values, but also economic standing. This webinar is really to talk about how we could position the New Zealand space sector as an inclusive and progressive space sector. How can we employ our differences in background and expertise to make sure that the New Zealand space sector will empower Kiwis of all backgrounds? And joining us tonight, we have a number of panelists of varying background. First up, Hazel Deacon. Hazel studied her master's in aeronautics at Cranfield College in the United Kingdom. She was a military pilot instructor before going into business development. After she moved into New Zealand, she managed Airbus NZ, followed by helping all sorts of Kiwi businesses at Callaghan Innovation. Now she's at Xera, helping Kiwi business succeed through the use of Earth observational data. Welcome, Hazel. Thank you for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Babette Voyasi. Babette has a master's in economics at the University of Pécs in Hungary. She did various aspects of business at Procter & Gamble. She's now at the Starship Foundation to give back to humanity while working on her space startup. She's the COO of Extraterrestrial Power, where she deals with the operational management and works towards providing electricity anywhere in the solar system. Welcome, Babette. Thank you for joining us tonight. And next we have Dr. Priyanka Dhopade. Dr. Priyanka collaborated with the industry to develop computational models of jet engine cooling systems at the University of Oxford. In 2017, she was named as one of the UK's top 50 women in engineering and one of the 72 candidates for the Canadian Space Agency's astronaut recruitment program. She led the Women in Engineering Network initiatives at the University of Oxford. Now she's a lecturer at the University of Auckland with expertise in aerospace, thermodynamics, and fluid mechanics. Welcome, Priyanka. Thank you for joining us tonight. And finally, we have Mahima Seth. Mahima served in the Royal New Zealand Air Force for 6 years as an avionics technician. She was also an avionics technician at the Rocket Lab. In the 2018 Act in Space Hackathon, her team's idea autonomous robotic system for in-orbit repairs made them the winning team. Mahima is also a part of the third Auckland program for space system mission, which was geared towards outreach, and she has done space-related presentations at schools around the country. She's now a third-year physics and geophysics student at the University of Auckland. Welcome, Mahima. Thank you for joining us tonight. So just some housekeeping rules tonight. As we go through the session, please put your questions in the Q&A section. Otherwise, also point out if your question is specific to a speaker. This webinar is recorded, and we will send in a link of the recorded webinar later. I'll first start out with some questions I have prepared, then we'll move on to the public questions. So I'm going to ask the panelists to step in with their thoughts after I ask my question. So first up, how do we make sure that people aren't left behind? Or how do we make sure that those interested in the space sector are allowed upward mobility regardless of their economic standing? Anyone?
I'll kick that off then. It's not such an easy question to answer because there are multiple things that need to happen in order to enable people from all backgrounds to participate, whether it's in the space industry or any industry, in fact. And it's beholden upon us to try and motivate people early to recognize the opportunities that can exist within the industry, but also to make sure our systems and processes are fair and equitable for all. I think, you know, the sorts of things that can be put in place are to have systems that take out the biases that we all naturally have when making our assessments for candidates, but also the systems for recruitment can be innately biased as well. So it's trying to find ways in which we can encourage people to apply and not inhibit them through the process that we set up.
Okay, so you talked about how there's the system of people of bias. Where do these bias come from?
I think we naturally tend to have biases. I think we're sort of kind of programmed that way. And that's what we do with those biases once we recognize that we have them, and how we act upon them that is important. So inevitably, when we're growing up, we want to try and belong to groups, whether it's a group of friends or you know, a group we associate with, whether they're sort of a support of a football group or whatever. But you know, we are pre-programmed to sort of link to those groups, and we want to make sure that we don't have those biases influencing our decisions when it comes to recruitment. So it's trying to take the emotions out of our recruitment processes so that we can be more objective when looking at candidates.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. I mean, maybe it would help if I shared like if I shared a bias that I noticed in myself. I recently just came back from a holiday in Rotorua, which was really great. I walked past a school, and my partner said to me, imagine all of the kids here that may not get the opportunities that you have had, purely because they are in what we perceive to be Rotorua, which isn't as technologically advanced or whatever as perhaps Auckland is. And so I think from my perspective, economic standing is a little bit difficult for me to talk about, because I don't know enough about it, but I think to answer your question, from what I see is that, and this is why I think programs like what APSS3 is doing, which is outreach based, I think it's really important to get students, no matter where they are, no matter what their economic standing is, whether they're in Rotorua, whether they're in Invercargill or Auckland or whatever, to really make space and conversations around space and science a norm. Because I know, like, from how many teachers I've spoken to that have, they're afraid of talking about space because they don't know enough about it. So yeah, I would just say that it's important to make it a norm. At the moment, I don't see talking about space and the education related to space as something that happens in all schools around the country. And as Heather said, to expose students and people to these things early is really important. Yeah, so yeah, that's what I've got to say.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point. It is a bit surprising. I can remember when I guess when I was a child, a lot of these bias, they don't really exist back then, but as you kind of get through life and then get exposed to a bit of media, you know, some of these bias start growing. So I guess that's quite interesting. Are there any other thoughts from the other panelists?
I mean, it's like Heather said, it's a very difficult question to address. And when you say, how do we make sure that we're doing enough, that we is actually lots of different entities. That includes government, that includes educational institutions, not just universities, but also those that award apprenticeships and the more, hands-on skills. Includes industry and includes individuals as well. So as the other two panelists have said, on the individual level, confronting your own kind of biases is quite important. And yeah, what you said in the beginning, I completely agree with it. Like, we have this opportunity in New Zealand to really start this sector from scratch, essentially. And I think diversity of all kinds needs to be built in to the ethos of the sector from the start, rather than addressing it at the end as like an add-on or nice to have, which a lot of already established engineering sectors are now struggling with, is how do they build in the diversity when they're already so evolved as an industry. So we have this really unique opportunity. And I think a lot of tech or engineering startups, for example, in my experience, they start from a person or a group having an idea, and they already know each other, and they go about trying to get funding and become established. And like I said earlier, diversity then becomes this kind of afterthought, or it's not even part of one of their goals. But I think an entrepreneurship ecosystem like what SpaceBase is trying to create, that links up various groups or individuals across a diverse set of criteria, can make a huge difference in setting up an industry or a sector that starts with a core value of diversity. So being aware of your biases, but also building that into how you do things from the beginning, I think is going to make the difference.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other thoughts or? All right, I'll go to the next question. So I watched the How on Earth Can Space Improve Our Lives webinar held by the New Zealand Space Agency a few days ago. I was a bit surprised that both the academic and industry speakers, they pointed out that there's a lack of talent. And to me, talents are people who've already put in the time to learn specific skill sets So my question is, what kind of skill sets are we looking for in the space sector?
I can go with that, but actually I completely disagree with that regarding the talent, because I think New Zealand is in a very unique position, attracting many people from all over the world, and also focusing on those who've been born here and they are talented and being educated as well. So actually I think we've got the talent here. However, maybe experience-wise, they couldn't experience it because the sector was not that big. Like we didn't have like NASA in the US before or anything like that. But actually, it doesn't mean we don't have the skills themselves. And I think people don't necessarily realize in this software-led world that yes, software will stay there, but space is really depending on hardware as well. So it's like there are other hardcore stuff we need to have, like physical stuff, and build those things and machines and satellites and everything that we are interested in. And I think with the new generation coming and having space as like a new sector for New Zealand, we have the advantage of not just with millennials working already in the workforce, but the Gen Zers coming in and bringing in many skills that are needed. Like we always think about in our company, about the critical thinking, about that growth mindset, about that infinite mindset that comes back to that. Yes, we do need that, because without that, you just can't create those things that don't exist today, because we are going into that space that we don't know yet what's coming in 20 years. And we want to create something. We are not aware of what we are creating yet. So I think like the skill sets that we need, some heaps of hardware related skills, like engineers, heaps of engineers, and also many other people who have that critical mindset thinking it through, and obviously some business related people who make it work from the operational point of view.
Okay, so you briefly talked about the infinite mindset. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so basically, you know, in business, we usually think, and then in many other aspects of life, that, oh, if I win, so there's a game. If I win, you lose. You have to lose, otherwise I don't win. But what about that infinite mindset that we can have that real win-win? And that you don't have to lose in order to someone to win. So that's what I meant, like with the infinite mindset, like, yes, there are companies already like Rocket Lab, and they will have competitors, obviously, because people are opening up to that market. But there are other parts of space that can be a win-win for the existing ones, for the new ones, and for the government, as well as private businesses. So we can create that kind of situation with that mindset.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Are there any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Babette has said. Like, I completely agree. But also, I think the skills needed for the space sector perhaps not that different from what's needed in lots of other engineering or STEM related professions. You need problem solving skills, you need creativity. Obviously, you need some technical skills like what Babette mentioned, your hands-on, you know, building things, and also computational skills. But also you need like management skills, communication skills, and being able to put things into context, because like Babette said, we're going into this area where we don't know what's coming. You need to be able to understand how things link together, how to see the bigger picture and what you're actually contributing to. This is something that engineers are not always taught in you know, the classical sort of university education. Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about you talked about how the engineers aren't really taught it during classical physics or classical engineering. So what are some ways we could do to mitigate that?
I mean, it depends on where you are. For example, I did my undergraduate degree, engineering degree in Canada, in Toronto, which has quite a big aerospace industry. So I ended up doing lots of internships at various companies. And that kind of gave me a picture of, okay, where do I fit in? Where are my skills actually going? And at times it did feel like I was a very small cog in a very big wheel, you know, because it's a very established industry. But I think, and I know that Rocket Lab is starting to do that, and lots of smaller companies in New Zealand are starting to establish these internship routes. That's really quite important for this emerging sector, because that's how it's going to evolve with all these new people coming in. It gives the younger people some perspective on what's actually going on, and then it creates this sort of dialogue between the people who are doing internships and the industry partners, who understand, okay, these are the skills that we're getting, these are the skills that we need, and they can work with the educational institutions to evolve the skill sets that are coming in to essentially create something that works for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, I think it might be worth me mentioning that I mean, like, I'm a student and naturally I'm wanting to go into a career in aerospace, hopefully in New Zealand if I can, but from my perspective, like, and it may sound like a bit of a complaint, but what I always hear, even from, like, I applied for 3 internships just yesterday, and they were all engineering, like, and the only reason I did apply for them was because the first requirement said BA, BE or equivalent. But I know that I am unlikely to get it because I don't have a BE, I have a BSc. I may have a lot of the practical skills that that come from an engineering degree, having worked before I came to university. But I agree with what Priyanka and Babette have said about practical skills, hands-on skills, all the soft skills and stuff. But I find that whenever I look for jobs or internships, I find very few of them to be STEM. They tend to have the E, but they don't tend to have a lot of the other things. Like, as a physicist, everyone asks me, what are you going to do when you finish? I'm like, hopefully I get lucky and get an internship at NASA or something. But yeah, I do think I agree with what the panelists have said so far, and that all of those skills are necessary. But I question, you know, when is science going to come into it? Because it seems like the industry is really evolving towards the engineering side, and everything that comes with engineering. And maybe that's just because the industry hasn't evolved enough to go into the sciencey type things yet, or maybe not enough of it that it has become noticeable to students or people that are about to graduate. Or yeah, so that's sort of my perspective. Like, I think engineers might have an easier time finding jobs in the space sort of thing. But yeah,
I can chip in on that, and you know, I come from an organisation that the engineers that we have are software engineers, so it's a slightly different breed, I guess. But we also have scientists. So Zera is focused on using the data that comes from space and using that to turn into intelligence through software applications. So we have research scientists who can help us to understand the calibration or the how you link what you're getting from space to what the ground truth is, whether it's in freshwater quality monitoring or land change detection. So we have research scientists we have research engineers and we have software engineers and product developers. And like Babette said, we have people like me. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I don't have a technical background. Yes, I used to fly airplanes, but it's not quite the same. And I studied zoology. So you don't have to have an engineering degree to get into the space industry. If you've got a passion for space, you can get into the space industry, but you've just got to figure out how you can best apply your skills in the industry. And the industry needs people from all spectrums. And as Babette said, that's from people who are business specialists to generalists who can manage people to the specialists who can build rockets and rocket engines. So if you've got a passion for the industry, you'll find a way in somewhere. But you've got to try and figure out what your strengths are and what you can bring to the industry and work on that basis.
And I would say that it's actually, I mean, I was surprised to hear about the BE thing. Like, I think that's a huge blind spot on the part of these companies who are advertising internships. They need to include people who have qualifications other than engineering as well, because I don't see why that's not relevant.
And actually, do they need to, I wouldn't say forget about qualifications, but not all people who've got the requisite skills have qualifications. So, we're moving towards a world where people get micro credentials, not degrees necessarily. And so they may well have the requisite skills and the right attitude and adaptability and flexibility. Maybe we don't always need degrees for everything.
Absolutely, agree with that.
Yeah, I guess maybe I should be a little bit more specific that I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's just that what I tend to notice, and again, this is my perspective, you can feel free to disagree or, but I guess, and I see this a lot with my friends in science as well, is we might have all these other skills that we've learned and equivalent qualifications. It's just that sometimes when jobs are advertised, it can be difficult to advertise yourself as qualified for that job because they've clearly stated, we want you to have this. Like, yeah, I might have that, but I may just have it in a roundabout way. And it can be really difficult for students. And I'm struggling with this, like, to market yourself and say, actually, I do have these skills, but I'm pretty sure that, somebody, because it's really obvious that somebody who has a mechanical engineering degree would know how to work with CAD. But that doesn't mean that someone in science wouldn't have that experience, It's just, it can be really difficult to sort of get that across to people. That's sort of all I was trying to point out. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm gonna move on. So how could diversity or inclusivity with a gender, cultural expertise contribute to the creation of new space fields?
I think that as much as engineers would like to, or I should say anybody in STEM would involved in the space sector, or I guess not even STEM, anybody involved in the space sector, as much as they would like to believe that they're objective and that the field is objective, I think that every person sees the world through their own individual lens. And this lens is made up of their own experiences that cut across gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, etc. And in an ideal world, none of these would matter because it would be the exact same experience for everybody. But the world we live in, they do matter. And the more lenses that we can use to examine a problem, especially one that's as vast as space, the better the solutions will be, and the more people that it will serve the solution that you come up with. So at the end of the day, I think anything whether it's STEM or whatever, is done by people for people in one way or another. So we have to recognize these various lenses that we see the world through, and recognize that people with different lenses have different ways of doing things, different ways of looking at a problem. And that will, I think, eventually benefit marginalized communities, address inequalities, whether that's access to data that's provided, or the ethics of the data, what gets done with it. And this way we can avoid the kind of herd mentality when too many people, I think, with similar lenses look at the same problem.
I think that's a great point, that when you come from an outside of a particular field, you're not constrained in the same way as people who've been immersed in it for maybe too long. And I think, you know, I reflect on Sir Paul Callaghan's saying that, you know, Kiwis are really good at the weird stuff. And I think it's because both the being geographically relatively isolated, they're very resourceful, but often they don't have the specializations, and so they come up with these left field ideas or ways of solving a problem that the rest of the world would never even consider. So having people who come from a completely different perspective is a wonderful thing when you want to create something new and different.
Oh, any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, I think it's, again, not necessarily space specific, because regardless of the industry, it always does help, you know, when you have different people from different background. And coming back to this fact that in New Zealand, like, I'm not from here, but you have all these people who are like having different knowledge from their backgrounds, and they can mix and match. And New Zealand is kind of having a really good startup community as well. So you can reach out to like-minded people and go and find that group, and that will never be really homogeneous anymore. So especially in Auckland, where I've been part of this, it was like such a variety of different talents that I think it's really a good point for New Zealand and being here. But also, I just wanted to say that we have to think about not just the current state of space, or not just the current state of the industry, but like when you think about it, you can think like everybody is so focused in New Zealand or around here now on satellites and then the moon and the Mars. And yeah, but there are companies, you know, who talked about space travel and hospitality and other industries joining in. And that's where, you know, there are some industries well established already, little bit gender specific and a little bit like expertise specific, but when it comes to space, it will come as well. So it will be quite a good mix, like lawyers already working on what kind of law is supposed to be, you know, on the moon or somewhere in the space, and how do we deal with that. And I think the variety is already there, but it's a little bit siloed still.
Okay, so I guess you talked a little bit about, you know, siloing, which seems to be quite a bit of a problem where the different fields they stay separate. Does any of the panelists have any suggestions for, you know, integrating or moving them together?
It has a little natural movement with conferences, for example, let it be in New Zealand, America, or Australia, or wherever I've been. I've met people, sometimes the same people or similar fields, and I think it's a great advantage in space that is still quite small here, so you can get to know those key people much faster and gain that knowledge of who is who currently and what is going on. So yeah, conferences are one of the ways, and obviously now online and digital kind of meetups and any other either self-organized or other like university organized or government organized events can help a lot, because yes, it's not just expertise, it's humans talking to humans, you know, and you have that kind of personal interaction and reaction, and yeah, and then you build friendships basically.
Okay. Okay, so all right, I'll go to the next one. So the way I see opportunities, or the lack of opportunity. So the lack of opportunity could come in two manners. So the expectation people have of you based on your appearance, and also the mindset where a particular person could give up because they think that having the space stream is a bit silly. So how do we change or mitigate these thought processes?
Yeah, I think it's a sad reflection that a lot of our youth don't have the aspiration that that meet the opportunities that are actually out there, and that was brought home to me by my daughter when she talked about some of her friends who had really stayed in their hometown and didn't go to university or didn't stretch themselves beyond what their families felt was appropriate for them. And it was that mindset that they didn't aspire to things beyond their immediate sort of vision. And you only break through that by exposing young people to what the possibilities are, and really setting that spark to fire their imagination early. And I think there's evidence to suggest you really need to do that by the age of 7 even. You know, it's really got to be early on that we are exposing our children to what is possible, and inspiring them through role models and through events and through activities like the Rocket Challenge. You know, those things really help kids to get interested in the first place. And then we have to sort of show the teenagers, you know, the pathways, and give them the openings that they can pursue. And they do inhibit themselves by thinking, well, I can't apply for that because I don't have this, this, and this. So we've got to help educate them to understand that they can give it a shot, and you know, they can reach these goals if they aspire to them.
Couldn't agree more, especially regarding the education, and that's why I highly appreciate Dr. Michelle Dickinson's work in New Zealand. So spreading the STEM in education, which was, for me, it's very surprising because our education system is completely different from the New Zealand one. So we have massive amount of science and music and any other parts of the education up until year 18, 19. But here, I really highly appreciate what she's doing, because I completely agree that early on, the earlier you started, the better. And that mindset before it settles and locks down, like, and you know, be conventional or anything, is just opening up. And then for the teenagers to give the real opportunities, because they are half adults. So they need that independence as well. So you can give them some tricky stuff and they solve it. So it's not like, you know, it's rocket science, eh? But yeah, so I completely agree with the education, and we should do something in New Zealand regarding space, regarding science, regarding the whole STEM education, to uplift it to the next level. Because the talent, I still believe it's there. Yeah, and the other thing, sorry, like Priyanka and Mahima, for example, like storytelling is a big thing in everything. And you know, encouraging other people with your own stories, like, yes, I've been there and I've done that, and yes, you can do it too. And I think we miss a little bit out on our local storytelling, because yes, we have Rocket Lab and everybody knows the story more or less, but you know, we have these individuals, and when you think at your level, like, oh, I'm X-year-old and I want to be an astronaut or someone, like, oh yeah, and I have seen, here you go, and she made it and she almost made it and she's going for it next time, and yeah, I can do it, you know. And that inspiration coming from one person that you can relate to, I think it's really important. So yeah, I would say like more and more storytelling coming out of the sector, it can be really encouraging as well. And you see, like, seeing the genders, so many women on this. So yeah, you can encourage that as well. So it's not like you know, only men can be astronauts anymore. It's over.
Oh, did you have something to say, Mahila?
Yeah, I guess I probably want to address the mindset thing the most, more than the appearance, because in my experience, I think that if anything has been held back from me, as in like there's been a lack of opportunity from me coming from a very male-dominated job, it hasn't been my appearance, so to speak. It's been my gender. So but what I really relate to, I suppose, in terms of lack of opportunities and the mindset, and purely the thing that you've talked about with thinking that the space dream is really silly. So I mean, like, I would just say that it takes a lot of courage to be able to admit that you want to do something that crazy, that you know, and in that I totally agree with what Babette has said about storytelling. I've been really lucky that I've actually met two people now, if you count Priyanka, who's you know, made it almost to the astronaut stage, and I'm able to talk to them you know, fairly easily. I can email them or whatever. But I've also met two astronauts who have been to space, and both of those experiences have been just so life-changing. I actually have a poster here from JPL, if I turn my computer around, which was signed by Mike Hopkins, and I put it in front of my desk and I look at it every day to remind myself why I'm doing this. So I think the mindset thing is really difficult, because you're trying to change what a person is thinking and how they respond to a situation. That's never going to happen quickly. So I agree in saying that the storytelling is amazing. Like, I mean, I'm nowhere near finishing my degree, like, come on. And I talk to girls and students, and they're just amazed at what I've done. And I'm like, it's, you know, it's fine. It's not. And they're really excited. And they love hearing about it, because it is like the stuff of dreams to them. And they love seeing that there's somebody out there who's actually doing all of this stuff. And that's why I think the outreach aspect is really important. And that's why I think publicity and exposure to students is really, really important, because a mindset is a really difficult thing to change. It took me like 24 years to be able to be brave enough to say, I want to be an astronaut, you know. I know there's plenty of people out there that are like that. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like, okay, I'm just going to do this. But certainly the exposure I've had to people who have done it has been amazing. So yeah, that's all my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, and I mean the question, the way it's phrased, it to me it didn't seem just restricted to people who are entering the industry, but also people at my level who are still progressing through the system. So the expectations people have of you based on your appearance. Certainly, I've been on the receiving end of, you know, unconscious biases in a very, very male-dominated environment. If I'm, you know, exhibiting some signs of traditional femininity, show up in an engineering lab and they're like, oh, well, she probably does software. So I think I feel like it's not my problem, it's theirs. So it's
Good
not my
approach.
mindset that needs to change. It's the environment that needs to change to adapt and accommodate different kinds of people who are bringing different skill sets to you. So I haven't, I mean, I've tried when I was a student, I tried changing the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the tone that I use, but I've stopped because I feel like it's not my problem, it's theirs. And in terms of, you know, thinking that your space dream is silly or whatever your dream is, I mean, I agree with what Mahima said, it takes a lot of courage to dream big, but at the same time, I don't think it's that actually turns people off. I think it's people tend to give up because of real systemic and cultural barriers that make you feel like your dream is silly. So again, it comes down to the environment and what companies, governments, educational institutions are doing to turn people off, to make them feel like their dream is a silly one, and that's what we need to understand. And I think if you are a person working your way through this kind of system, some reflection and situational awareness is really important to understand that, okay, even if you are working hard and you're trying your best and you're not being able to achieve your dream, it's probably not you, it's probably the environment, and that's what needs to change. And you need to be given that space to speak up so that the environment can change to help you achieve your dream, however silly it may sound.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that with our company. So it's a startup, but it's in the same situation, like a student who said like, oh, that's silly, because when we started to talk about, yes, we're going to make electricity on the moon and we're going to make solar cells from moon dust. And it's like, okay, so it was like, oh, no, it's not going to work. Oh, it's another 20 years. Oh, you know, it's, yeah. And then you keep saying and you keep trying, and then you start finding those people who say, yeah, that makes sense. Do you have the science behind? Yes, we do. You know, like, can you make it happen? Yes, we do. And then you just keep going and going. And I think it's not just our industry, but other times people give up too early, and you just keep banging that wall and banging, and, you know, like with the startups, and we are not there for raising that amount of funds or something, but yes, you have to go 100 times to get one yes. So you've got all those no's and the naysayers, and then something happens, like suddenly, like look at how space speeds up basically right now and became more focused. And yes, we are keep telling the same, and we are still going and moving on. So by the time they are ready, you will be way more advanced with your technology, with your ideas, but like just have to keep banging those walls. And it was not different for other industries either, or anything else, like being able to vote as a woman. It didn't take like from yesterday to today and now you can vote now. It was like a little bit longer battle to get that right. And now it's a little bit like in a business world as well as in government and education, it takes time, like, you know, whatever we learn as a science, like Nathan Wallace said, it takes 20 years to be applied. Like he has the science, like neuroscience for kids, how they learn. And now is the time we started to apply them. But the science is from the 90s, for example. So I think it's just really like keep going. And those opportunities are there. I think it's really, as you said, all of you, like the mindset, and just don't let them be the naysayers, like lead you, but lead them.
Okay. So I think there seems to be a lot that could be gained from storytelling. And so how could other engineers or scientists, people who've already done it, how could we get them to, I guess, do a little bit more storytelling to, the people that really matters?
What do you mean by how could you do more storytelling?
Oh, so it seems like a lot of the aspirations we give to young people, it's everyone, they seem to enjoy storytelling, and perhaps like a lot of the changes of mindset, they also occur through really good stories, like great stories. So I am wondering, how how could we get more storytelling to people? How can we get the right people to tell their stories to other people?
I think that's a bit of a difficult one to answer. I mean, like I've talked to people that have speaking opportunities flying at them left, right, and center, and they have to say no, and then there's also people like me, and people, have different expectations from a speaker. Um, Sharing a personal story, like I got asked to do a presentation or like talk about robotics or something at a primary school where I'd spoken before. And I said, okay, like, I've done this for you before, but I'm getting a little bit busy, and I would just appreciate if you could, sort of help me out a little bit in a financial way, because it's taking my time and that sort of thing. And I think, and the reason I bring that up is because it's as important for people that are established in the industry, like Priyanka, Babette, Heather, to talk, but also younger people to be able to talk. And the more experienced and established people have more grounds. I think people have their opinion, but I think they have more grounds to be able to say, look, I want to do this, but I can't always just do it for free, do it all the time. And I think they have more of a backing behind them, so to speak, to be able to say, look, I would, appreciate a little bit here. But then younger students like myself, I don't necessarily feel comfortable asking, really. I would love to do it. I get asked, I got asked a few times, but as soon as I say, I would appreciate a little bit, they'd be like, oh, bye, So I think I don't expect to be compensated all the time, but I think just some way to where the opportunity for people to share their stories is readily available. Because I know I have a lot of friends that have done amazing stuff as well, but they haven't had the opportunity to share their story. Finance things is just one part of it, but I don't think that, everybody doesn't have opportunities coming at them all the time. So that's probably one thing that I would say is some way, I don't know what, where we can actually provide people stories, I guess. And I don't know what form that would take, but yeah.
I guess you have to think about, who are the receivers of the stories, because if they're 7-year-olds, they're not going to be attending speeches. So, those kids, you really have to capture their imaginations, probably in a school environment or a kids club type environment. And really, schools need to have programs to expose their pupils to different stories from a range of sectors, not just space. If we're trying to appeal or reach teenagers or those people who are sort of moving into trying to apply for jobs, then it's a different channel, whether it's social media or whatever. And I think a lot of companies do try and provide employee stories on their websites as part of their career pages these days. But again, it's not always very inspiring. Yes, you want an environment which is going to really help, like I said, spark that imagination. And so perhaps a space forum, whether it's web-based or social media-based, is a good place to share stories on how I got started or what was my career path. And it's not just for women, but people from all parts of the industry would be a good means of helping to communicate that.
Okay. Yes, I just want to encourage the audience to definitely start putting your questions down if you have any. Otherwise, I'll just ask a question for the panelists. So getting a job, whether in the space sector or other industries, it often means going above just sending a CV. It means reaching out to other people, utilizing connections. So what are some pieces of advice you have for those that lack connections?
Find some.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to sort of, walk the streets and go and knock on doors, or go and ask friends of family, or go along to events like this and get the name of somebody and then contact them and say, can you help me? And I think even walking into a front door of a company sometimes, asking to talk to the HR person or somebody from the technical field, people usually are actually really keen to help. But you can't go out and reach everybody, so people coming to you, generally people will get a response. I think that's my experience anyway.
And also you can do a lot of search online and check them out, see their companies are online. You can go to LinkedIn and check the people and see if you have connections, because usually a real person as a connection who introduces you, it's a really, really big help. And just go through, and then you will be introduced to the next one and next one, and keep asking, and it's just really helps, because sometimes those connections seems valuable and then nothing comes out of them. You are not interested in each other, or just not working in the same field or something. But sometimes it just comes up like, oh yeah, okay, later on we will work together, just not right now, but hey, I know someone, and again, someone who might be interested in what you are doing, or you just have matching personalities or something, and you might complement each other in that business. So yeah, I think it's really important, the personal connection in it, but heaps of digging online, and yeah, and get to know them and read about them.
Yeah, and again, I would also emphasize the responsibility of the environment to also reach out to people that they are, have the skills that they're looking for. So that means industry partnering with the educational institutions, or the institutions that are training their workforce to provide the skills that they need and make themselves more visible, because it shouldn't be just the responsibility of a high school student to reach out to lots of different people. They should also be making themselves more visible. And I think, again, SpaceBase has quite a big role to play in this. If they have a database of every person in New Zealand who's involved in space, then it's really easy to connect with people and send an email to somebody, So having a central database or directory, and then maybe incorporate some of the storytelling into it as well, and feature videos, or feature, your stories of how you got to where you are. That would inspire younger people, or even people who are just below you in your career stage, not necessarily very young people, not 7-year-olds who are going to check out SpaceBase's website, but me looking at a CEO's website. That's lofty goals, but you know what I'm trying to say. There should be role models and storytelling and accessibility across every career stage.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Or?
Yeah, I love what Heather said. Get some. I agree with. I do agree with that. But I think it's maybe a little bit. Maybe I would mention that why you might not have many connections, whether that's you don't feel comfortable talking to people, or whatever it happens to be, or you haven't had the opportunity, you don't know how to approach people, whatever. I guess my response to that would be very blunt. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but how badly do you want it? Like, because I have had I'll tell you a little story. I love stories. So when I won the Act in Space hackathon, it was a very business-oriented type thing, and we were going to France, and we had all these people that were like, oh, who do you want to meet? Which company do you want to meet? And all of my teammates, despite me being the leader, were like suggesting all of these names. And I just kind of stood quietly for a little while and said, can we meet an astronaut? And believe it or not, that lady made it happen, you know, and all I had to do was ask and be brave enough to say, you know, this is what I want to do, because that's what I wanted to do. So I think maybe, and one other thing would be that I personally like to have a bit of a personal connection with whoever I'm speaking with. That's how I've ended up with a lot of opportunities so far, like my job at Rocket Lab. You know, some of the things that have come out of Act in Space have all come from my effort to get to know people and to talk to them, and not just approach them when I need something. And I'm not saying I'm going to sit down and, you know, have a life discussion with them, but certainly I do take the time to be interested in what they're saying, not just from a business perspective, but, you know, like Friday beers type kind of thing. And I think that's really important. If you're not a social person, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, we are people, we like talking to each other. Start small, and human interaction, face-to-face preferably, is what I would recommend for building connections. But if that's something you struggle with, you know, start somewhere. Toastmasters, social groups, things like that are really good for that. So that's the advice I would give if you want to make more connections. Is I don't see a substitute for just talking to people, but you got to start somewhere. So yeah.
I think you make a really good point, and it's something I really admire about Maori culture, is how they start with their mihi and introduce themselves, starting not with their name, but, you know, where they come from or where their ancestors come from, and how they connect to the rivers and the land. It's just a beautiful way of introducing things. And the number of times when I've heard people giving their mihi and somebody else comes up afterwards and they says, I'm connected through the same thing, you know, and it's just finding that thing that can connect you, that can make you more relatable to that individual. So it doesn't have to be a Maori mihi, but it is, you know, is there something in that person's background or where they're from or things that they're interested in or companies they've worked at that you can connect to somehow. And that can make a huge difference in making it easier for you to approach someone, because you have something in common, hopefully, or you found something that you can have in common to talk about. But it also makes that person more able to relate to you as a person as well. So trying to find those connections in your research or talking to others about someone you're trying to reach out to is really valuable.
Also, deciding or making up your mind, what do you really want? Because I remember when I was there with my CV back then, and what do you want to do? Like, I don't know. And sometimes you just don't know. You got out of university or anywhere, and you're just like standing there, oh, I made it. So what's next, you know, and what I want. And when you know what you really want, you can be so focused on it and find those people and those connections and everything. But sometimes you are, and it's really interesting because that means like you're open to so many things, but just pick one and just start with that, and maybe it will work out perfectly, maybe not. But I think that helps a lot to focus your attention on who do you want to connect with and what really interests you, because you might start connecting with people and it's like, oh my God, they are not really my kind of people, or maybe this field is not for me, let's swap to the next one. And you discover yourself as well in other people. So yeah, I would say like it's really important to know what you want, because otherwise you can't ask for it. And I really completely agree with Mahima, just ask. And yeah, you shall be given, you know, like somebody somehow it will come and sort and help. I don't mean like just put it out and it will happen on its own. But if you take action and just one day try to connect with one person, the other day one, no matter how small that action is, it will work.
I laugh when you say know what you want, because I never knew what I wanted.
Yeah,
I I've always been an opportunist in my career, and sure, I've had ambitions and known vaguely the direction I've wanted to go in, but I could not have planned how my career has turned out. And even when I emigrated from the UK to New Zealand, you know, we came without jobs, and we just knew that it would work out, and we took opportunities when they presented themselves. Now you can create opportunities, and you can make more opportunities arise for yourself by reaching out, by, you know, seeking them out and being ready to be able to take advantage of them when they do crop up. But if you don't have a clear understanding of what you want to do, don't worry. Because when things come up and they excite you, then you really go for it, you know, and you do everything that you can to achieve in that field. But if you're sitting there going, I have no idea what I want to do, well, I was in that same chair. I've been in it many times in my career, and it's still kind of worked out okay. So far it's going all right.
Yeah, happened to me too.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me as well. So I completely agree with everything that you've said. But I also think it's important to be aware, because the first question we were talking about economic status and mobility, that a lot of people can't afford to not, you know, to move to a country without a job, or can't afford to sit down and think about what they really want. They just kind of have to go where the jobs are, where the opportunities are. And so I think there has to be support from an emerging sector like here in New Zealand to create this, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I mean, I don't have a solution, but there has to be some kind of robustness in the system to capture all these people who don't necessarily have the privilege to sit down and think, oh, I want to do this, I'm going to take some time off and think about it. Or do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, there has to be a certain kind of economic incentive involved with the system.
Yeah, I didn't mean like you sit back and relax and just think about what do you want, because what we've been doing, and right now I have 2 jobs and all sorts. So you are doing it on the go when you have some time to think about it. And yes, I've been in the same situation. Like I just went somewhere, and the only thing I want, and we came here without having a job to New Zealand. So, and the only thing, but I know I want to make it work no matter what it takes. And I didn't start my first job in New Zealand using my economics background or marketing background. I went to a veggie shop because that was the place as an opportunist. I need that money. I want a job, and they don't want to hire me because I don't have 3 months New Zealand experience. Make that happen because I want that job. So it's like, I don't say that you just relax and choose, you know, like, okay, what do I want? But it comes, you know, like at least if you try to think what you want, I just say that it's easier to ask for what you really need in order to get what you want.
Absolutely.
It just smoothens everything. Otherwise, yes, opportunities still come up. And yeah, I'm not far from opportunistic, but
I just want to point out that I feel slightly better sitting here not knowing what I'm supposed to do, having heard from you 3. But I think I've gotten so much out of what you 3 have said. And I think, please feel free to add and subtract as necessary. But I think what you guys are trying to say is, I see it as pick your battles kind of thing, you know, and what I get from it is that it may not be the thing that you want. Like Priyanka, as you know, like astronaut is never going to be the first job, but make sure that you're heading in the right direction. And sometimes you have to take a detour, you know, we all do veggie shop jobs, and we do tutoring jobs and whatever else to, you know, make ends meet or whatever sometimes. But I feel better. I just wanted to point that out. Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, thank you. So I think, one other thing I would just say is, as long as you're heading in the right direction, I think that's what that's what matters, even if you take a few detours along the way.
Yeah. And as long as you take action always, regardless, you know, it's always better to take action than not to take action, and just go with it. And I also agree with Priyanka regarding, like, that would be great to have the system around and the support and all of that, but I'm not sure how that's going to manifest or who will build that exactly. Because right now, most of the countries have, like, you know, government funded space programs and all sorts. And yes, commercial companies are coming up and more, but we are still, you know, it's not that well funded and well built around so that everybody can do what they want. Like, it's not like an easy software to do and have an e-commerce shop, but it's much more than that.
But I think thinking about these things from the beginning would be a huge thing. It's figuring out how we can build a system that will work for everybody.
Yeah, I think we're in a really good sort of position to do that. Like you say, because we are an emerging industry, now's the time to get it right and to identify what the challenges are so that we can start addressing them early, so that, you know, in 5 years' time, when we're a little more mature, things are actually looking okay from a diversity perspective in our organizations. And I'm sure you'll agree, we all struggle to get the right diversity. Even in a small startup, you know, we've struggled too. It's not for lack of trying, but understanding what the challenges are and working as an industry to try and overcome those when we're at this early stage, I think is really important.
Okay, so it seems, okay, so there hasn't really been any public questions, so definitely ask questions if you have them. I guess the next question I had was, so we talked about diversity and wealth, skill sets, and others. So this event actually has been separated into three separate space regions, so like Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. So there's also a bit of regional diversity. Is the inherent idea of regionalism good for New Zealand, or is this a good chance for the different regions to work together?
Personally, I think we should be working together as New Zealand Inc. And if I think back to the UK had some really good regional initiatives to create clusters around some principal industries to help build local business. They did it very well, and they linked to educational institutions, and so they had apprenticeships and training schemes and things like that, and all fit into the local businesses that fed into the big industry, and everybody was happy. We don't have those big industries in each region for us to do that, and we don't have enough mass, if you like, or market to be able to do that within New Zealand. That's my view. And I think we're much stronger if we work together as a nation, as one team, rather than trying to pick each other off against each region. And sure, there can be different parts of the country who have tendencies to skills in particular aspects, but I think we should be looking to connect and collaborate way more. And as a country of 5 million people, we should be able to do that a lot easier than they managed to do it in the UK.
Yeah, I completely agree, because mentioning, like, yes, we are just 5 million people. So, like, if you imagine London has more people than Australia, and Australia has like 4 times more people than New Zealand. So it's like we are just that tiny, and if even we cannot work together, then it doesn't make too much sense. You know, it's just that small. And yes, it's far regionally, but with the digital age, it's not that far anymore. Everything became closer, and if we want to make it happen, we can. So I would definitely go against the regionalization of that, and seeing already what's emerging in Australia. You know, they have the different states, and, you know, they all want to win that we are the state for that space, you know, and we are the ones, the top ones. And I know I'm coming back to this infinite mindset, but if there's a chance to be just one on the top, then the rest will be behind always. And why should we encourage that? I would really discourage that attitude of like, yeah, there always has to be one on the top, while we could emerge together to the top. We're not that big as a country, I mean. So it's, yeah, I would really like to avoid what is already emerging in Australia with the States.
Any other thoughts? Or?
I think, did you want to go first, Priyanka?
Oh, no, you can go first.
Okay. So both, I agree with what Babette and Heather have said about it's probably a better idea to work together. And yeah, I think they've made really clever and smart arguments for why. And so maybe I'd just like to offer a very simple reason for why I support their views. And I just think of it as, if tomorrow if New Zealand was to put the first person on Mars, it will be New Zealand putting the first person on Mars. It ain't going to be Auckland, Wellington, or Christchurch. And to me, that it doesn't make sense why we would not work together, why Auckland would make it harder on themselves. If the skills exist in Wellington and Christchurch, why it wouldn't make sense, because at the end of the day, we are working together as a country, and it just makes sense to work together. So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, I agree with everything that the other panelists have said. I mean, coming to New Zealand after having lived in Canada, UK, and Australia, which, as Babette said, have much bigger populations, it seems rather silly to separate New Zealand out, New Zealand's 5 million people out into these kind of regionalized sections, at least initially. I think over time, as industry matures and depending on what happens, I can see regionalized sections sort of being specialized. For example, Auckland can be the thermo center, or Canterbury can be the CubeSat center, or whatever. You know, I'm just making it up. But over time, I think the relationships and the expertise will evolve. But initially, we have to be working together. It doesn't make any sense to separate out.
All right, so there's no further questions. So I guess I'm just gonna stop us here. So we're reaching the end of our journey. I just want to ask each of our panelists for their closing thoughts. Starting with Heather.
I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think New Zealand's space industry is in a really good position to set ourselves up as a progressive industry, rather than just replicating what the rest of the world has done, or the few other countries that have done it. Actually, we're in a really good position to set ourselves up for a more progressive system and environment within which our people from New Zealand and abroad can participate. And it's beholden upon all of us to do what we can to encourage, motivate, inspire, and recruit the talent from diverse backgrounds.
Bobbitt, do you want to go next? Or?
Yeah, I can. I did enjoy it as well. Thank you very much for the variety of different backgrounds and people and also. And I think I completely agree with Heather. And I would just add that recognizing how much ahead we are in space compared to other nations, I think the government should a little bit recognize it better and understand it, that this is an advantage that we are building as individuals. But imagine how much more we could do if they support it more heavily. And, there is this shift of industries as well. Like some might not be that important anymore, but what if we focus more on the future and build it and make New Zealand like that proud nation of it? Because, you know, others are coming too. So that's the thing, like anybody can get there. And then we just lose our advantage for like why we could do, you know, much more. And yeah, so I would really encourage the government to support through education, through early education, through schools, through supporting startups more. So there are so many aspects and research institutes, how they can support it, that is not utilized yet. And I know it's tough times right now, so I'm not chasing them for, there are other big problems we face with, but also it would be really valuable for everybody to focus on a future and a little bit invest into that future. And also the attracting, we talked about that we had the talent here, but sometimes we could also have more effort into attracting different kind of talent, attracting investors. If we say we don't have the capacity, then having programs that are attracting that money we don't have maybe. So there are so many aspects that would be great if it would be a bit more active.
Priyanka, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I can say that's different from what's already been said. I've really enjoyed meeting all of the panelists and you and Emmeline, so thank you for organizing this. I'm a little bit sad to see that there are more panelists than attendees. So I wish that more people would tune in and care about these issues, because it is important, inspiring, and trying to encourage more diversity into an emerging sector. And like I said in the beginning, it's not just us, it's all the different entities that are involved with creating this ecosystem that will support the science, the industry, the benefits, basically the entire life cycle of the space industry. And everybody has a role to play. So that includes government, as Babette said, they have a huge role to play. Educational institutions, so whatever I can do at the University of Auckland to support the space ecosystem through the Space Institute or the Mechanical Engineering Department, I will be playing my part. And also the companies to make themselves more visible through space-based or whatever other platforms there are. And then every individual to really reflect and think about the lens that they're viewing the world through, what kind of problems they want to solve, and what their biases are, and being very honest about them.
Mahima?
I had lots of time to think about it, but I think I do support what Babette and Priyanka have said about the whole government needing to get behind the space industry in general to achieve many different outcomes, you know, more money into education, into startups. And personally, as someone who is still very much like on the cusp of possibly entering the industry, I would just love to see more opportunities for everyone in STEM fields and making it, you know, getting past the barriers we've discussed today, like socioeconomic backgrounds, regions, parents, etc. And I guess to put it finally, I guess I would really personally love to see New Zealand be leading something, you know, like we think of the USA as leading human spaceflight, or very opinionated, or Russia leading whatever. And I would love to see New Zealand lead something, whatever it happens to be, some area of research. And that would be really, really cool to see. And I look forward to seeing how I can get involved in all of that.
All right. So I just want to make a quick apology to I guess now Maori viewers. So we are unfortunately unable to secure anyone in the space sector of a Maori background. But otherwise, the Wellington webinar tomorrow will have a Maori speaker in that session. And so I just want to thank each of our panelists for such a wonderful discussion and sharing their thoughts with everyone. Thank you to Space for organizing and sponsoring this event. Thank you to SJC New Zealand for contributing to this system, this session. And I guess a very big thank you to all our wonderful audience for joining us tonight. Good night, Ad Astra.